Hi, this is your host Swapnil Bhartiya and welcome to TFL Let's Talk. VMware recently announced the general availability of Tanzu application platform. It's a modular application-aware platform that allows developers to quickly build and deploy secure software on any cloud or on-premises Kubernetes cluster. To talk more about the platform, how it will enhance the developer experience and Kubernetes adoption, we have with us today Valentina Elaria, Product Management Director at VMware. Valentina, it's great to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me.
We have, of course, covered Tanzu so many times ever since it was announced. But if I ask you, it has been kind of evolving, changing. So what is the platform today? Talk about that.
Tanzu is really a broad portfolio. And, when we started building components for it, we were focusing primarily on that infrastructure and operations layer. So we wanted to make sure that it was very easy for users to bring up a Kubernetes cluster. And then we started thinking about how do you manage multiple Kubernetes clusters at once. And this is a lot of the early products that are part of the portfolio. As we work with more and more of our customers and users, what we hear is we're all committed to Kubernetes. And now we need to really find a way to enable our application teams to be successful on top of Kubernetes itself. And that's where the need for components that are targeted at that persona and really start going up the stack come into existence. And that's really why we started working on Tanzu application platform to begin with. Wanted to bring together a lot of the existing benefits and outcomes of products like Tanzu application service to the Kubernetes world.
Ever since Tanzu was announced, so much water has gone under the bridge. What I'm trying to say is so much has happened in the cloud native escape because it's a very fast moving, space that we are in. If I ask, because the adoption of Kubernetes is increasing and, cloud native has kind of become a de facto, right? Everybody has to have a cloud native strategy. It doesn't matter where your workloads are running. If we just focus on software delivery, how things have changed, what kind of challenges, organizations are facing. And of course, once again, they'll go back to asking how is Tanzu or VMware helping them. So let's start with the problem area.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you think about the problem area, I'm going to just start talking about, what happened in a conversation with a customer a few weeks back. And they were sharing that one of their biggest challenges as they think about their DevSecOps tooling and path to production or software delivery, however you want to call that portion of the solutions, it's quite complex. They end up having a lot of custom, bespoke, snowflakes type of supply chains or path to productions that they need to build because of a variety of reasons. That specific customer had a very large number of line of businesses that have very different requirements and very different best practices. And for others, it has to do with just the fact that they're targeting different cloud environments, right? And so they don't want to deploy to a single Kubernetes component. They want to deploy to multiple cloud infrastructures. And so they're trying to make sense with very disparate tooling. And so a lot of these heterogeneous, fragmented type of solutions are really sitting at the core, the crutch of why this is quite challenging for these organizations to successfully adopt Kubernetes at large. And so one of the things that we're doing with the Tanzu portfolio and Tanzu application platform specifically is to bring a solution that has a set of batteries included, right? You talked about this modularity in your opening statement, and this is really at the core of what Tanzu application platform is all about. We want to make sure that it's really easy for someone to get started, and all the DevSecOps tooling that you need are prepackaged and ready to go. And the way we like to describe it is that we give you Tanzu application platform with a pre-baked opinion, our opinion on how to run that path to production. But what every single organization wants, based on what I was just describing, is actually the ability to customize that path to production, to bring in existing tooling that are well established and adopted within their organization, and bring their best practice. So in a nutshell, bring their own opinion to the platform. And so that's really where we see the best of the two worlds coming together, having a simple pre-baked opinion that makes the initial adoption curve lower and simpler to navigate, but then having the ability to sort of customize. So thinking about that customer that had a bunch of different line of businesses, by using Tanzu application platform, they can take the default supply chain or path to production and say, line of business one wants to have this set of tools, chain this way. I'm going to give it to them. Line of business two wants a different tool for CI. I can swap it. I can customize it slightly differently. And similarly, they can just have that solution run across, let's say, two public cloud environments or a public cloud and an on-prem type of environment.
Excellent. And as you were talking about bespoke Snowflake kind of environment, plus we have also been seeing kind of the great resignation. People are burning out. Sometimes in organizations, no matter how much you try, it kind of creates tribal knowledge. When you do too much customization, you end up creating a technical debt internally. Now, I was reading a tweet a few days ago, and it was more about, hey, it's easier to find a new job every 3 years than to refactor your code and kind of deal with your own technical debt. So how is Tanzu kind of help? Because as you said, it's like balance between both worlds. They get the flexibility and customization, but also kind of standardized. So how do you help customers so that it doesn't matter whether the team members are moving or not, their workloads, their business is not getting impacted? Can you talk about the importance as well?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think the right balance there is that the core tooling, we do want to preserve some of that, right? So if you have standardized on a specific tool for CI or for CD or for image scanning or for code scanning, right? What we want to make sure is that we're not ripping that off and replace it, because that causes a lot of ultimately problems for the organization. But where we want to help is a lot of that custom scaffolding and duct taping of like things together to build into that path to production. That's where we want to bring a more standardized framework for you to interconnect this component to describe that desired end state, something that it's much more aligned with Kubernetes and the declarative model of Kubernetes itself. And so it's that right balance of not ripping and replacing every single tool, but helping organizations move closer to Kubernetes, to cloud native. Also helping as part of that journey potentially transition a subset of their tooling. So maybe there's opportunities for some of these organizations to revisit what is the most cloud native aligned CI component or CD component that should be adopting. But for the most part, it's just really about helping them get there. Maybe one angle that we haven't quite touched on is sort of the counterpart of all this DevSecOps tooling, which is the developer, right? And as you were talking about, just this pandemic blues that we're all suffering for. I think, it's really important to think about, team health and team productivity. And so one of the things we've been observing as we're working with these organizations, often when these top-down mandates happen around Kubernetes, this definitely has an impact on the morale of the teams, on the morale of the developers. They're overwhelmed, and this is on top of, a very overwhelming world that we live in, right? And so for us, it's all about thinking, hard about increasing that developer productivity, making it easier for organizations to bring new hires in and not having to learn this 15 books about, how Kubernetes behaves and every single intricacies and components there, but being able to really think about their business logic and business application and relying on a bit of the magic from the platform. And then as the developers grow into their knowledge of Kubernetes, as the organization grows into their knowledge of Kubernetes, they can sort of start peeling the onion off, right? And taking more advantage of what's behind that sort of magic first layer.
Can you also talk about, just like boil down and just focus purely on developers, that how it's really going to improve their productivity, their experience, and also kind of help them with not getting burned out? Because the fact is, no matter how much we like to talk about DevOps, DevSecOps, a lot of things are now falling in the bucket of a developer. So things are getting very complicated for them. Yeah,
absolutely. I think, if you think in the bucket of like things that are getting more complicated, there's probably two trends that I'm observing the most. One is there's a huge push of organizations to shift left, and shifting left often just means like, oh, now this becomes a developer concern. I want to shift left automation. I want to shift left security. And now we're asking a developer who is just like not skilled for those tasks to take on more, right? So that's point number one, just the shift left trend, right? That it's really translating into more burden. And second is just the very basic facts of Kubernetes was never designed to be a developer interface, a developer platform, right? So there's a huge, developer experience gap that exists there. And we're asking a developer that needs to interact with raw Kubernetes to understand networking and services and policies and eventing and all sort of things that are just like way above and beyond what it should be thinking about. And so those two things, the shift left and the Kubernetes complexity, turn into a developer having to actually build an application that has a lot of knowledge of the underlying layers that should not exist there. And so a few of the things that we're doing is one, it's really thinking about pre-packaging a lot of the tools that developers need so that they don't have to go and find those and figure out how to stitch them together. And we want to bring them to where the developers are familiar with, where the developers work. So one of the things that we do is we integrate with their, with the most common IDEs so that you can actually create workloads and debug and get logs from the IDE itself. We pre-package all the tooling that developers need for the inner loop, for their personal developer experience. So if they need to build an image, if they need to deploy, even if their organizations wants them to scan code or scan images, all of that, it's sort of built into what we give the developers automatically. They don't need to go and scramble and figure out, like, how do I scan code? How do I scan an image? How do I stitch that into my automation workflows? And the second part is all about separations of concerns and bringing some of the best practices of the organization up front so that the developer has those safe guardrails. And so there's a couple of things that we do there, which we're seeing being quite powerful. One is we think hard about giving developers blueprints or what we call accelerators, which are very much, some predefined best practices from an organizational perspective of this is how you build this type of app with this language, with these backend services. So you don't have to go figure it out. Like start from these, nice blueprints that you can just click and get started from. And the second part is all about separation of concern, right? So what we want to make sure is that a developer can have a consistent experience, whether they're in the development environment, in a staging environment, or getting ready to push to production. They should not have to redo things differently or rebuild their application. But at the same time, we want to make sure that the DevSecOps persona can say, oh, this is a dev environment. You can just do some like lightweight integration and we don't need to worry about CD and all these sort of things. But as you move closer to staging and prod, now I want to have more formal scanning. I want to have more formal CI. I want to have CD and all sort of interesting things. Now these two, because they're decoupled, from a developer perspective, I'm still running the same commands. I'm still interacting the same way. But the steps that actually the code is going through are controlled by a different persona. And I don't have to worry about any of that. So scanning can be brought in, all the DevSec automation can be brought in, and I don't have to worry about any of that. So ultimately, in a nutshell, it's about bringing these tools close to the developer, making sure they have to change the least amount possible from their current development workflow, and making sure that DevSecOps persona still has a lot of control of what is happening behind the covers.
When we look at, the Tanzu, application platform and all the work that you folks are doing to improve, developer experience, what is the direct impact on the business itself?
Yeah, absolutely. Ultimately, it's about just velocity, right? It just increases the velocity for the business. Developers can worry about building business value, delivering business value. So they're not wasting time procuring tooling, they're not wasting time learning about a platform, they're not wasting time debugging and troubleshooting and making sense of components that are not core to their day-to-day job. And ultimately, it impacts, as I said earlier, right, their productivity and the team health, and as a result, the business. I think what is indicative of how critical this is to businesses is that as I work with some of the large and smaller organizations that we've had the pleasure to partner with during our early phases of the beta releases, many, if not all of them, have sort of shared their executive vision. So as an organization, what are some of the top priorities for 2022 and 2023? And I can tell you that the vast majority had this developer experience and developer productivity as one of the topmost items in their vision and their priority list. Because as you said, right, it has a very direct impact on like how quickly, how effectively you bring applications to market.
Valentina, thank you so much for taking time out today, and of course,
Of
not only
course.
talk about the Tanzu, platform, but also a wider problem that the developers are facing, and also the critical role that they play in the success of any business. So, thanks for sharing those insights, and I would love to have you back on the show. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. Thanks.